Silence. That's what you hear when something goes terribly wrong on live television. Not the laughter, not the applause, just silence. On one particular evening, millions of viewers watched as one of Hollywood's biggest stars stood up, looked his host dead in the eye, and said two words that would change late-night television forever. We're done. What happened that night wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was the moment the mask slipped, the moment Hollywood's politeness shattered, and the moment two men revealed truths neither wanted the world to see. This is the story of the night everything fell apart. Late-night television has always been a ritual, a safe space, where celebrities come to charm, to laugh, to sell their movies with rehearsed anecdotes and practiced smiles. But sometimes something breaks through the script. Mark Wahlberg arrived at the studio that evening like he had hundreds of times before. The routine was familiar. Wave to the audience, sit in the chair, talk about the movie. Go home, simple, professional, predictable, but tonight would be different. Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his desk preparing for what should have been just another episode, another celebrity, another 20 minutes of controlled chaos wrapped in comedy. But beneath the surface, something was simmering, something neither man fully understood yet. What started as routine promotion would spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on live television. A confrontation that would expose jealousy, resentment, and the hidden cost of success in Hollywood. This is what happens when two worlds collide, when the performer meets the provocateur, when professionalism dissolves into something raw, dangerous, and brutally honest. This is the night Hollywood broke. The applause was electric when Mark walked out. Boston's favorite son, the action hero, the man who transformed himself from troubled youth to Hollywood powerhouse. He waved, he smiled, he settled into the guest chair with that confident energy audiences had come to love. Mark Wahlberg, everybody, Jimmy announced, his trademark smirk firmly in place. Everything seemed normal. But if you were watching closely, if you knew what to look for, you could see in Jimmy's eyes something calculated, something waiting. The first question seemed innocent enough. A joke about Boston? A callback to Mark's past. The kind of light-hearted ribbing that happens on every talk show, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness hidden beneath the laughter. Mark laughed it off. He'd played this game before. Years in Hollywood had taught him how to deflect, how to stay professional, how to keep the interview on track. Those were different times, he said. I was young, made some mistakes, learned from them, but Jimmy wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, that characteristic lean that meant he was getting comfortable, settling in for something. You've really reinvented yourself, haven't you? Jimmy continued, his voice carrying a weight that made the compliment feel like an accusation. This is where the temperature began to change, where the air in the studio shifted from warm to cold, where the audience started to sense that something wasn't quite right. Mark's smile remained, but his eyes narrowed. Just a fraction. Just enough. People change, Jimmy. People evolve. The word hung there, evolve, as if Jimmy had been waiting for it. That's one way to put it, he replied. Some people might say you've just gotten really good at managing your image, controlling the narrative, and now the mask was slipping. The pretense of friendly banter was cracking. And Mark, a man who had spent decades learning to control his temper, his image, his reactions, felt something ancient and familiar rising in his chest. What exactly are you getting at here, Jimmy? The question was direct, clear, a warning shot across the bow, but Jimmy either didn't hear it or didn't care. He waved his hand dismissively, that grin never leaving his face. I just think it's fascinating how Hollywood works. How someone can completely reinvent themselves and everyone just goes along with it, like collective amnesia or something. The audience felt it now. That uncomfortable recognition that this wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something else. Something real and dangerous unfolding in real time. Mark leaned forward, his Boston accent thickening with barely controlled anger. You know what, Jimmy? If you got something to say, just say it. Don't dance around it with all this passive-aggressive nonsense. Passive-aggressive. The words landed like a punch. Jimmy's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise, but everyone could see through it now. The pretense was gone. The comedy show facade was crumbling. I'm just making conversation, Jimmy said, but his voice betrayed him. This is what we do on talk shows. We talk? Yeah, well, there's talking, and then there's whatever this is supposed to be. The line was drawn. Mark wanted to talk about his movie, the reason he came, the professional obligation he was honoring. But Jimmy had other plans. Plans that involved something deeper, darker, more personal than anyone watching could have anticipated. Because this wasn't about a movie. It never was. This was about resentment. About jealousy. About years of watching someone else succeed while you convinced yourself you worked harder, deserved more, earned the right to be on top. The guy who really knows how to handle himself when things get tough, Jimmy said. His words dripping with insinuation. Mark's voice dropped. That dangerous octave that anyone who'd seen his movies recognized instantly. What exactly do you think you know about how I handle myself? The temperature in the room plummeted. The audience held its breath. The crew behind the cameras exchanged worried glances. This wasn't going to end well. Everyone could feel it now. And then Mark stood up. When a man stands up in the middle of a talk show interview, it's not a good sign when that man is Mark Wahlberg, whose reputation for intensity is matched only by his reputation for professionalism. It's a 5-alarm fire. You know what, Jimmy? Mark's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. I came here as a professional to talk about my work. But if you want to sit there and take shots at me for some reason I can't figure out, then we got a problem. Jimmy tried to recover. Tried to smooth it over with that late-night host charm that had saved him countless times before. Mark, sit down. Let's reset here. But there was no resetting. No going back. The Rubicon had been crossed. I know the difference between miscommunication and someone trying to get under my skin for their own entertainment, Mark said, each word deliberate and measured. The silence in that studio was deafening. You could hear the hum of the cameras, the buzz of the lights, the collective held breath of 300 people who suddenly realized they were witnessing television history, the bad kind, and then Jimmy. Made his fatal mistake. I think you're being a little sensitive here. Can't we have a real conversation without you getting all, street about it? Street, one word. 5 letters. A lifetime of implications. The studio froze. Time seemed to stop, and when Mark spoke again, his voice was quiet. Too quiet. Did you just say I was getting street about it? Jimmy knew immediately that he'd crossed a line. You could see it in his face, the recognition, the regret, the panic. But pride wouldn't let him back down. Not on live television. Not in front of millions. You think this is fun? Mark's voice rose now, the Boston accent thick as concrete. You think sitting here while you take cheap shots at me and my background is supposed to be fun? This was the moment, the point of no return, when professional courtesy dissolved into something primal and honest. Mark stepped closer to the desk. Jimmy leaned back, and the power dynamic that had defined their positions, host and guest, controller and controlled, shattered. Completely. You don't get to poke and prod and make your little comments and then try to move on like nothing happened. When you realize you pushed too far, the audience didn't know whether to watch or look away. This wasn't entertainment. This was a car crash in slow motion. And then the truth came out. You want to know what this is about? Jimmy's voice cracked, his facade crumbling. Fine. It's because guys like you make me sick. The words exploded into the studio like a grenade. And suddenly everyone understood. This wasn't about an interview gone wrong. This was about something much deeper. Jealousy, resentment. Years of watching someone else's success while convincing yourself you deserved it more. You come from nowhere. You screw up half your life and then Hollywood just hands you everything, Jimmy continued, the poison pouring out now that the dam had broken. Meanwhile, people like me work for years, decades, and we're treated like we should be grateful just to be here. There it was. The truth beneath the comedy, the bitterness beneath the smiles. The real reason Jimmy had invited Mark onto his show, not to promote a movie, but to settle a score that existed only in his own mind. Mark shook his head slowly, processing what he was hearing. You think my success just got handed to me? You think I didn't work for everything I got? But Jimmy was past the point of reason, past the point of professional courtesy. He was in free fall now and he couldn't stop himself. You're a novelty act, Mark, a curiosity. You're famous for being famous. The insult landed, hard, complete, irreversible. And in that moment, everyone watching knew that nothing would ever be the same. Mark stood there for a long moment, absorbing what had just been said. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle, almost sad. You know what, Jimmy? You might be right about some things. Maybe I did get some lucky breaks. The audience leaned in, hoping for reconciliation, for some kind of resolution that would make this all okay. But Mark wasn't finished. But there's one thing you're completely wrong about. You said if you make one mistake, your career is over. But that's not true, because you're making a huge mistake right now, on live television in front of millions of people. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. And you know why your career won't end? Because you're going to spin this. You're going to talk about how I overreacted, how I couldn't take a joke. And people will believe you because that fits the narrative better than admitting that you're a bitter, jealous host who used his platform to try to tear down a guest. Jimmy tried to protest, tried to defend himself, but the words came out weak, hollow. Mark delivered his final judgment with the calm of someone who had already won. Jimmy, there is no line, there is no fair. There's just people working as hard as they can and hoping for the best. And if you spent half as much energy on your own craft as you do resenting other people's success, maybe you wouldn't be sitting here attacking your guests because you're bitter about your own life. It was devastating, precise, true, and Jimmy had no response. This interview is over, Mark said simply. He turned and walked toward the exit. Jimmy called out desperately, begging him to stay, to end on a better note, to save the show. But Mark stopped one final time and delivered the lesson that would echo far beyond that studio. Next time you have a guest on your show, treat them with respect. Don't use them as therapy for your own issues. And if you can't do that, maybe you shouldn't be hosting a talk show. Watch me, Mark said, and he walked out. Left behind was a studio in shocked silence, an audience that didn't know how to react, a host standing alone behind his desk, facing the wreckage of what he'd created. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Jimmy's mortified expression as he realized what had just happened to his career, his show, his reputation, all in the span of one disastrous interview. Hollywood is built on illusions, on carefully managed images and rehearsed moments, on the idea that everything is under control. But sometimes the mask slips. Sometimes the truth breaks through. Sometimes two people standing under studio lights reveal more about themselves than they ever intended. That night, millions watched as professionalism gave way to honesty, as resentment overpowered reason, as two men showed the world exactly who they were when the script ran out. The lesson is simple but profound. Success doesn't erase your humanity. Fame doesn't heal your wounds. And no amount of applause can silence the voice in your head that tells you you're not enough. Mark Wahlberg walked off that stage with his dignity intact. Jimmy Kimmel remained behind with only his bitterness for company. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, both men understood a truth that Hollywood tries desperately to hide. Sometimes the show can't go on. Sometimes it just ends.